Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this forum, which is called Our Adoptee, Our Alien. There are two concurrent art exhibitions going on right now in Seoul. One is at the Kyunghee Gallery, and there are 4 video artists there. And then there's also an exhibition going on at the Gallery in the Insadong. So today we have 3 adoptee artists who will be speaking about their work. They're going to be talking about issues of how adoptee artists, or how they, as artists, represent issues about identity. Additionally, they're going to be talking about how activism affects their artwork. And so the main themes are activism and identity.
First, I'm going to speak a little bit about identity, and then I will speak about how I pursue activism in my work. I kind of want to try to explain how I view identity and a special situation it is to be adopted concerning identity. I think what is really unique for adopted people is that there are the cornerstones of identity is usually things like family, knowing your family and knowing your cultural background and knowing your ethnic background. But with adoptees, you don't have that. Really to be adopted is to have a double identity. I'm born and raised in Denmark, which is a European country very different to Korea, and so my thinking and my understanding of the world is very Western, but then my ethnic background is different. And I think really growing up in Denmark, I didn't really give so many considerations to my ethnic background. I think Denmark is a special country like that because we are a lot of adopted children from Korea, but we don't really have a Korean society, Korean people, except from adoptees. So when you walk down the street, people kind of presume you to be adopted. How important it is for me to understand my ethnic background and to understand Korean society and to incorporate it in my identity. So I think this double identity is very important to express and understand for me. And I think also there are a lot of critical issues concerning identity that both the Korean society and the Danish society has to consider, and that is part of what I'm trying to do in my work, because I think there's really a lot of problems concerning international adoption, and it hasn't really until now been on the political agenda in neither Korea or in Denmark and the West. And I think we as adoptees really need to explain to the societies we reside in and to the Korean people how we want to be perceived, because there's also a lot of stereotypes connected to adoption, a lot of prejudices and a lot of legal rights that I would like to change. I think what I'm thinking about identity is that you kind of create a third identity as being adopted, because you don't really, in some ways you have 2 homelands, because you have Korea where you're born and your ethnic origin and your biological background. On the other hand, your thinking is very Western. So, but on the other hand, you don't really have any place to be completely at home in, because Western society still doesn't really recognize adopted people as to be allowed to really have your ethnicity, and that is what I would call identity cancellation. I think it's kind of my responsibility in art to discuss these matters, because there's just so many problems. And in my individual work, I work with video art, where I do shorter art videos which contain a lot of symbolic issues. I work with language and textual work. And then I do some cine documentaries. I also do some networking and more alternative art, experimental art. I think that has to do with the way the contemporary art society functions, because at least in Denmark, post-colonialism is really something that we're just beginning to discuss. And the art scene is perceived very much through Western eyes, and through white people's perception of how the world is structured. So that is what I would like to try to reorganize, or to restructure, or to find other methods of thinking, and to create this platform that serves as an alternative to the established art scene. But also, in the established art world, I try to show my work in places like, for example, the seminar, where you can debate the issues that I take up in my videos. I did a documentary recently with something called Chamber of Public Secrets, which is established for artists in Denmark, and we're trying to take up socio-political issues that are not really debated in the public, or at least not really from how I would like to, for example, it's very much controlled by the media and how the government has perceived it. For example, with immigration, we take up issues such as adoption to create this personal voice instead of how the media is looking upon it. And so with Chamber of Public Secrets, we're trying to make an alternative platform for artists. For example, we have a TV station in Denmark, which is called TV Stop, and right now it's being distributed to artists. And so what we would like is to have the broadcasting time to show videos and film work, which cannot be shown in public media or commercial media. I think that serves as a very important alternative to the more mass-produced or commercial TV stations in Denmark. I'm doing, together with 3 other Scandinavian artists who are also adopted from Korea. We just recently established an artist network. And it's kind of funny because I just went to the International Adoptee Gallery here in Seoul, and I realized that there has been a lot of activism related to artwork in the States and here in Korea, but it doesn't really exist in Europe, or at least not in Scandinavia, so we have been quite unaware of that. And so what we would like to establish is a platform and a network for adopted artists in Europe as well. like to be perceived and how we can show our work and change the concepts, the way of thinking adoption. And the way we're going to try to start it out is by creating a website. And part of our work is to simply have a place where you can communicate as adopted artists. Another thing is that we would like to make the European art scene aware of Asian art and Korean adoptees art, because it doesn't really exist now. But it is in this nascent process. Okay, and then I don't know what's. Yeah, I think.
Or you can finish. Or
No, I don't know. I lost track of. More related.
In my artistic work recently, earlier this year, my first book came out. It's a children's book. It's called Cooper's Lesson, and it's from a San Francisco publisher that does a lot of bilingual work. And I am so excited that my translator, Min Peck, who I have never met, is right here with us. And it was really incredible because the first and pretty much only book for children that I had that had to do with being Korean was her book, which is called Baekhyun's Dream, and was published in 1979. So it was really incredible to be working with her, even just through our publisher. So I'm very grateful. The other interesting thing is that my illustrator is also Korean adopted. Kim Kogan, he's an artist in San Francisco, and he's a little bit younger than I am, but we're basically the same generation. And the story is not about adoption, but the young boy is mixed race. He's got a Korean mother and a white father, and he is very frustrated that he cannot speak Korean, or he just speaks a little bit. His mother has been trying to teach him. And he goes to a Korean grocery store and has an encounter and develops a friendship with the owner around their different experiences as Korean Americans. And I don't have copies of it, I just have one, but I really encourage you to come look at the illustrations and Min Peck's translation.
선영 씨의 최근의 작품은 지금 보시는 그 쿠퍼의 레슨이라는 그런 책인데요. 그것은 그 샌프란시스코에 있는 그 Children's Book Press라는 그런 출판사가 있는데, 그것은 주로 그 이중 언어, 그 어린아이들 위한 그 동화책을 이중 언어로, 예를 들어서 한글하고 영어, 스페니쉬하고 영어, 중국하고 영어, 이러한 것을 이제 주로 이민자 어린이들의
A little small press, a little micro press, and we publish poetry. And I left mine's in that Best Buy bag. But my chaplet, it's called Vestibulary, and it's based on the Hangul alphabet. And I'm really a complete beginner with Korean, but as a poet and as someone who works very intensely with language, or tries to, I was very interested in this space of being an outsider to the language that we were either spoke before we came. I was speaking a little bit before I came to the U.S., or that we would have obviously grown up speaking. And I think that relationship is legitimate, and it's okay to explore that space of not knowing and having just a kind of material relationship with the language, with the alphabet. I was very intrigued with just the technology of the Korean alphabet, its invention by the linguists in King Sejong's court, that mission of making literacy available to the entire Korean people, I thought was really quite revolutionary. I was very interested in that, and how a poetic encounter could come out of that. And I can talk about that later. I can show you. I just had little tiny poems based on each character and its physical characteristics. And that was kind of one of my ways to try and start encountering the Korean language as an adoptee and highlight the fact that I don't know the language, I'm learning it, but I will never be a native speaker. So what do? Do I spend my life longing to be a native speaker, or do I try and do something that might be helpful for our community in some way, in an imaginative way?
권영 씨는 또 지금 하고 있는 프로젝트에서 선영 씨는 시인이에요. 근데 이 중에 한글
I'm becoming increasingly drawn to film, video, and performance because language has so many limitations, and especially when you're trying to reach or work with an international audience, you realize how limited it can be. And also we're becoming, especially in the West, a more and more image-centric, image-driven society. And I think we're not given the tools or the opportunity to analyze and critique those images. We're becoming more and more of a consumerist society, and the West is exporting its capitalist practices to the rest of the world as rapidly as it can. So I'm very interested in looking at images. I'm in kind of pre-production on a couple of small video movies. One is a documentary on cross-cultural adoption. And I also think, to wrap up, that our identities as adoptees are performative in nature, just like any kind of identity, but all of the things that we've been given, kind of the scripts that we've been given when we were children by our parents or by our adoption agencies, not only were they very limited, I think were very restricted. And for most of us, I think we felt there was a huge void out there that wasn't being explored or given to us in a kind of fruitful way. So that's why I think I'm very interested in the work that other artists are doing, what they're doing with image, the body, social space, and sound, as well as text and image. Thank you.
This 5,000 of Korean history and 400 years of Korean-European relationship and 100 years of Korean-American history, 50 years of international Korean-American history. And of course the last mention is not recognized anywhere. So I think after 50 years of international interracial Korean adoption, we can start to think about what happened over those years, and also what the first, second, third, fourth generation of adoptees by a decade have been done in terms of art. So the first studies, I think, made on Korean adoptees has been made on a more psychological level, adoptees in crisis, and of course doesn't give us a very good image, like we are all psycho or something. And I think that slowly after, like especially I think early 90s, adoptees and other people have been interested in other issues than just the psychological state of our mind. And example in France, they made a research of Korean adoptees returning to Korea, and it was back in 1996. And I think later some other like gender issues or whatever other issues among the adoptees. So there is a very much a trend of among adoptees are very self-centered, and being an artist is even more. So I'm not ashamed of that, but that's part of who we are, and we have to accept that. So I call my story.
괜찮아요. 왜냐면은 미히나롤리는 여기 또 이렇게 번역한 게 있잖아요. 그렇죠? 그러니까 여러분 여기 뒤에 있는 거를 잘 보시면은 그분이 지금 그 얘기하는 거예요. 전부. 그걸 보십시오.
I've been living, I'm from the first generation of Korean adoptees in Belgium, and I'm in my mid-30s, and I think that back in '88 it was a non-known Korean overseas adoptee artist back in Europe. And so I felt that I was very isolated from other Korean, first Asian artists. And I started to paint when I was 13, very like self-taught. And so I just thought that art would be a way to express myself in other ways than language. Since you know that maybe in Belgium you have a linguistical war, and I've been living in a bilingual family, so I think art and visual art was very important for me to develop myself in a way that I want people to understand me in a not normal way. So anyways, I see that my role model are Teresa Hakcha and maybe Yoko Ono as an Asian overseas. And they've been like, I think, the first one at doing art and expressing their identity through their art and activism also, even though I don't do the same work at all. So back in '88, because the Olympic game was very important key date for Korea to be more international, for me I think it has been the click, the little coin thing saying, oh, you have to think about something else. That I said, yeah, I'm Asian, I'm Korean, but I don't know anything about that. So I made a first film. I mean, people pushed me to do a film. And then I was lazy and I'm still. But I did that movie finally. And of course, because I had no education in movies, I was just like a painter. I decided to just write a poem. And then from that, I got some people helping me with the technical part. But at the end, because of that movie got some audience, I could come to Korea and then realize how much I was not Korean. And of course, in my second movie, then now I had some practice. I did a movie called Back to the Roots, and it was very in the mood. You know the movie In the Mood for Love? It's like not much say, but just like that. And then for me, because I couldn't speak Korean at all, I just put some images of Korea with the things that really shocked me or like things that interest me, and just chose the music that are in contrast with the images. And of course, European music, Western music, and Korean music. So, and my third movie was about Japanese community in Belgium, nothing to do with adoption, but still about my Asianness. So that's basically what I've done in terms of film, and I realized that I can't be a filmmaker because it's too stressful for me. So knowing my limits, I decided to be an activist. And but the problem, I'm not very social, so I had to work with people again. And so I decided to come to Korea, and because if I'm in Korea, I don't have to talk with people, because anyway they don't understand me, and I don't speak English, and I don't speak Korean. So I'm just in my world with my painting, and I'm happy. But then more and more people, Korean adoptees came to me, first from Belgium, so I felt very happy, because I could speak French. But then the American came, and I was like a little bit stressed with that. So I decided to continue my art and my activism, but then never thought that I could really be an artist in terms of exhibiting, maybe selling, or trying to change the art world, especially not knowing what was going on in Korea. So in the mid-90s, many Korean adoptees came, especially from the States, and they were all filmmakers. So I thought, oh, that's something that can be interesting to see as a large picture of a medium in the art. And you had Miguel, you still have Tammy, and Kimberly, and Sari Thomas and Kim Soo Taylor in this movie about their identity issues as an adoptee in Russia. And I think knowing them and seeing the movie, I felt that there is something growing up in the adoptee community, not just as an adoptee but also as an artist, and how much they see themselves as an artist, and also bringing a voice and being strong, and maybe with other Korean adoptees, maybe Asian or interracial adoptees, we could start to discuss an issue. Maybe, I don't know if you know Tracy from Australia. She's a domestic interracial adoptee, and she's been talking about the adoption issue, interracial adoption. And I think there is that tendency that we don't have to just be Korean adopted to talk about adoption, and there is different way to talk about that. She did about through pictures and very powerful picture. You also have, I think, a performer, Adrienne Piper. She talked about race and how people perceive her. And I think for many adoptees, it's about how people look at her, look at them, and how it's not much about how we look at you, but it's like how me and me again. I mean, we have to be frank, that's why we are artists. But anyway, it's like, but at the level of what we absorb ourselves, we can share a community that may be similar to some adoptees and maybe from some geographical region like Europe or the south of Europe, the north of Europe. And so that's, I think, something that we can study also, and hopefully some people can give us a chance to talk more largely to not only Korean adoptees community, but also for the large art community. And in Japan, I think the first talk that adoptees will be included in the Korean diaspora and not just the Korean Japanese or the Korean American. So I hope it can start thinking bigger. And so I talk about artism now because while I was in Korea, I met a performer from Chicago, and her name is Kate Hurst, and she's the one who really kind of enlarged my world in terms of activism and art. She had a strong point of view about what is Korea, her Korean identity, and I saw her struggling a lot about how to fit her art and what is Korea in her, and how people can look at her art without being offended, or like she wanted them to be offended. And so there's the whole thing that we start to do after like the first exhibition of Korean adoptees back in 1996, and with a good review from the Korean society, we still wanted to have more exposure in Korea. So with my friend Son Hee-joo, who is a scholar from UCLA, we decided to do a performance called Han Diaspora, Space for Shadows. And from the Space of Shadows was introducing the large diaspora, Korean adoptees, mixed race, Korean who are interested in some social issue, to talk about different alternative or taboo issue in the Korean society. And then on the second performance, it was a yearly performance, Kate Hurst came, and then it was 4 Korean adoptees who were talking about the work. It was Mickey Ann, Susan Spencer, Kate Hurst, and someone else, but I forgot. So anyway, so talking with Kate Hurst, and in 1999 there was an exhibition of Korea America, and it was held at Art Sanjay. And she'd been simply rejected by the fact that she was not an immigrant, considered as an immigrant, but she was an adoptee. And I feel that every adoptee, at least from our generation, we are immigrant and adopted. And the fact that she had white parents didn't make her in the show, and it was not about her artwork, but it was just about her experience, which I think was totally wrong. So we decided to do, instead of like crying and crying, we decided to be active, and then activism and art combined. We did OK Book. So this is our little baby. And we had like about 150 emails from people, mostly from the States, because American are well connected, European not that much at the time. And Japanese, we didn't speak the language. Korean, Brazilian, we didn't speak the language. And so we had a lot of limit because of that. And but we got like about 25 answers. and many from America. And then we started that. We were thinking to do 100 best artists of the Korean diaspora, but we failed. And so we get about 25 and 4 European adoptees that we knew personally. So the second book was about, and we had more time to get translation, is the Korean Japanese diaspora that contained no adoptees at all, but still we wanted to cover that, and we want in this book to include Korean overseas adoptees and the Korean diaspora and the second generation, third generation, and not making any discrimination on that. The only thing we also wanted to do is to include young artists, because the Korean society is very much not taking seriously a young artist, and we believe that we also, they believe, have a voice also to bring in the art world, and we had to take them from the beginning and support them. So the third one is the Korean European artist. So it's some from Denmark and from Swiss, from France, and we are working on the fourth one, with gonna get some Australian artists and Brazilian, including also European and Korean American. So that book also includes visual artists, writer, filmmaker, installation, and to give you an idea of what happened over the years. And we hope that it can initiate other bigger exhibition, or enlarge also the community and see us, for the Korean art community, to see us as an extent of their world also, and we will be very happy to do so, to be so. Voilà.
Your thoughts about art and activism kind of changed, and you started to think about things in a more political way. And I'm just wondering if Jane and SuYoon, if you could talk about your evolution as well, from art to activism, or activism to art, and what that was like for you, what the transition is.
We had no models. We were only studying Western artists and English language artists. And so really, I think the aha moment, or the trigger, was getting into a little writing mentorship program just for Asian Americans. And I really had never read anything by an Asian American writer until after college. Even though I was aware of it, I was more interested in African American literature, because in the States, that's sort of the longest and richest history in terms of artistic development in relationship to political status. So anyway, I did that, and it was so amazing to be in a room with other Asian American artists, and they all happened to be women, and to see how we were all struggling with the same kinds of issues and subjectivities, and how to express them in language was really interesting. But there was still a void, and so then I started a group called Unbound, Asian American Women Write, and just started collecting Asian American women writers in the Twin Cities, and realized, there are a lot of issues that we had to face in terms of audience development, our own development, artistically and politically. And from there, I've done a lot of work with nonprofits, art activism, educating myself, being educated by my peers and my betters, and kind of the more people you meet, just the more you realize that there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of work that's being done.
I think after a while, I found out that there were more people like me having difficulties fitting into this art scene, on how I do it, and then I decided to go to Korea now this summer, and after deciding that, I kind of decided to do some projects on adoption, because before that I didn't want to have anything really to do with that in my work. But getting into it, I really got more interested in it, and I thought that it was important to myself mostly. And then, I don't know, afterwards I really wanted also to express more things to the public, or maybe that it wasn't only important to me, but that it also carries a responsibility.
You were able to find the space to create your work, and what kind of support you received, especially in the beginning when you're starting out, because you're not in the mainstream art scene, it's white. So what kind of support did you receive and kind of influenced you to continue with your artwork?
I've been really blessed with a lot of help along the way. But as a writer, you know, there are a lot of Master of Fine Arts programs in the United States for creative writers, but it's a very white and often, I think, very elitist scene. And I didn't want to enter that and just continue to have my work misunderstood. You know, other people who write in multiple languages in writing programs have gotten responses such as, you know, why don't you just translate that, or why don't you leave that out, or why don't you put in a footnote? It's not seen as legitimate to give equal space to more than one language in some places. You know, there's a lot of experimenting going on as well, but I just didn't want to subject myself to that. I didn't think that I'd be able to really find the mentors that I was looking for. So with poetry, it's been very kind of just hit or miss, trying to find different people and finding models like Teresa Ha-Kyung-cha and other books that have been published, other artists who are working in multi-disciplines. With the children's book, it was kind of a fluke, and then the support, the reason I wanted to write it is that there aren't any books for mixed race children, or there are very few. There are starting to be more, but there are very few that have a kind of shadow side to them. The literature for children of color and for mixed race children, what little of it there is, puts very much a happy rainbow family spin on it. And the adoption books are all written basically from the white parents' point of view, and they're basically saying there's nothing about the child's history before, for the most part. There's nothing about the birth family. It's all about, well, isn't it great that we can make a new family? And that's one perspective, but it's certainly not the only one. So I would just say that it's just a struggle, but I think, you know, there's more and more of us. There's more consciousness of the Asian diaspora, and as an activist, I also feel responsible for helping the next generation.
Korea, because the space, I mean, many Koreans live in a very small space, and it's so expensive. And even you have maybe a big space, you want to do big art, but how can you move that? I mean, unless you are rich and you can buy, I mean, you can rent a car or whatever. So the limit is also very financial. And considering the situation, my art is either I can or I do calligraphy, so I can roll it and I can put in a way that I can transport it not too expensively. So everything is, in terms of what I want to do, has to be considered because of the financial limitation. So that's my struggle, I guess. And it's very much what is in Korea if you don't belong to a rich family.
How do you think you can help each other, or?
I didn't know there would be so many artists here, and that it was so established over here, so I'm really happily surprised. And I think our networking in Europe can learn a lot from your experience and what you have already done, so that, yeah, I'm really happy to get to know that. What what we're going to do in the future with the network. I think what we really want to do, want to start out with, is that Anna and Trine in the first row are also some of the initiators of the network, and so what we talked about was that since we live closely to each other in Scandinavia, we want to start out in Scandinavia with doing seminars like this and really putting focus on the Korean diaspora in Europe, because there hasn't really been any exhibitions or critical seminars held by adoptees in Europe at all, not to my knowledge at least. So that is really what we want to do, besides establishing the website.
90s generation of Korean American, I felt that, oh, I don't need to be a filmmaker anymore. It's like, they've done all. So. But in some ways it's good also to get, to keep a date of what is going on, so you know that it's like if you are impressionist and you do impressionism, okay, it's nice, but you want to do something different or something that doesn't exist, or can bring something more to the world, or a reaction, a different way to see. So the Cubist came, and so I feel that now it's a reaction to what I saw, that what I try to do something not in reaction but like different, that people don't see this everything adoptees art, but it can be different facets of it.
Comes out of a private vision. It's really totally collective, and the more adoptees I connect with, the more I see our commonalities. One thing I think would be really interesting to do as we continue to network and form groups and organizations is to host each other, so that if I know you're coming to the States, I can help you, get gallery space, or you could stay at my house, or I could connect you with someone I know in New York or whoever, and so that we, have some mobility and just continue to support each other's work.
So earlier, Jane, you mentioned that you want to create awareness and consciousness about adoptees and the Korean diaspora, or Asians in the West. And Mihee and SuYoon mentioned about being marginalized. With Mihee gave the example of the Korea America exhibit in Korea, with only accepting Korean American or Korean immigrant American artists, and SuYoon with difficulties in the writing community. So, and as a filmmaker, I find that I've been in positions where I feel like my work has been marginalized, or the work that I want to create. In the U.S., where if you have just a few films on adoption, they say, oh, it's already been done. Whereas there's hundreds and hundreds of films about the Holocaust and World War II. So when you make work on people who are a minority, it's seen as, it's been done enough. And in Korea, I was working with a company, and they also said the same thing. Oh, we've already done that in Korea. But I found that problematic because it was done from the perspective of Koreans and not from adoptees. And so my question is, how do you overcome being marginalized as an artist in Korea and in your home countries? And how much do you really care about reaching to the mainstream audience? Because Jane mentioned kind of creating awareness to the West, and so in doing that, you have to kind of reach a mainstream audience.
There were some anthology and some other work that, like exhibition snapshot on Korean adoptees. And of course it's about adoptees, but then it doesn't mean that any adoptees can be an artist or writer. And the integrity of the work we submit and what we want to show to the public has to be clear. Do you want to be seen just as an adoptee or a real artist, and what is the quality of the work? And sometimes I feel that it's never really been done, that only this exhibition really struggle to see. We don't want just like any adoptees doing just a piece of work for this exhibition. So my struggle for the not only for the Western world or for the Korean world, is to just be clear and keep your integrity in what you're doing. People who curate also and people who invest in that. So, and I would like to promote more, encourage adoptees artists to really keep doing art and whatever. Maybe they are tired, but someday maybe we will be recognized.
Adoptees want sometimes to reclaim their ethnicity or their Korean background because it has been really commonly understood for us to be Danes only. And so I think we have been forgotten in the whole immigration policy and concerning ethnic minorities. And that is really what I think we, as a start, need to focus on, or to reclaim this right to feel Korean also. But I think there's, I mean, if there are exhibitions concerning ethnic minorities, I think adoptees are forgotten to a large extent, but I also had the experience recently that that you are able to, that the interest is there because people also want to understand our point of view.
I think it's a really political issue. I think it's really, really important. It impacts everyone who's trying to put work out or learn how to do anything. I think one of the big frameworks that we're dealing with is the East-West dichotomy, or what is seen as an East-West dichotomy, and the fact that Asian or Asian American, Asian European artists are seen as Eastern, or if their work that they're doing is working with some kinds of traditions, they're seen as traditional, that anything from only the West can be modern. You know, this notion that only the West is modern, and the West is has a modernizing function for the rest of the world, has to bring the rest of the world up to speed and develop them. And so I think we can't just be artists, we have to be activists. Even if our art isn't really speaking to a mainstream or to a white audience, it's like if we don't do the politics, it will be done to us, and it is done to us, and that's part of the field that we need to, sow, even if our audience is really each other. And so we have the problem of our artist development and audience development, but often we're the audience too, So I think we need to just speak about it, not just in terms of, oh, this publisher wouldn't publish me because they already had an Asian American book, or they already did an adopted film, which is totally true, but enlarge it to, someone was saying about minority, you were saying about minority work in general. Look at the economic practices and how art is just one thing along an axis, a whole axis of disadvantages for people of color, people from poorer countries. So I totally agree.
Has been doing interpretation for us. If you see yourselves doing the same kind of artwork,
참 여러분들 젊으신 것 같은데 앞으로 계속 이런 종류의 미술을 하실 겁니까?
all of you guys seem relatively young, and I was wondering if you guys see yourself doing the same type of artwork, let's say like 40 years from now, or is it important to you right now because you are young, or do you see yourself shifting in terms of doing other things later?
Anywhere and do anything that has to do with art, because I'm so really, really invested in reducing our invisibility as Korean adoptees and as women of color. Even though a lot of us are very privileged in other ways, I think I am constantly trying to do new things in different genres because you run up against limits in different media. So for me, if I am lucky enough to live 40 more years, I would like to just, whatever comes up, I'd like to try it, yeah.
Explore my media and purify it and for the activist work. I want to see it develop, but I mean, in 10 years, I really don't know how it will, well, it is.
And I noticed the similarity and togetherness. And I see you sitting here, all of you together, and I see you networking and etc. And perhaps you could approach as a group to the Korean production company. Suggestion.
Sorry, I mean, there is like a grant for Kyoto, Korean Overseas Foundation, and for the Film Commission. And we submit our script, and they say because it's not Korean, it's like we cannot be accepted. But like the Korean Kyoto can because they have a Korean connection. So we've been trying over like 5 years, and it seems that the mentality doesn't change on that level. So it's not that we never try.